Did you know that insects have an evolutionary biological imperative to pose for photography? It's just in their nature to model. That isn't true at all, but if it was, there's only one kind of lens that is going to do it right, and that would be a macro lens, specifically in the telephoto range like over 100mm. I personally believe that every single photographer needs a macro lens, and in this video, I'm going to try to convince you that I'm right. But first, in case you're new to photography, I want to tell you what a macro lens is. Sometimes you'll hear people use the term macro only in the sense of close focusing, which isn't totally wrong, but technically what makes a macro lens is actually simply its reproduction ratio. To be a macro lens, it must be at least 1:1, meaning that the image projected onto the sensor will be the same size as the object in real life. That is a really ugly definition. I know, I didn't come up with it. Really, in most genres, you can get by with just about any lens for any genre, even though there are technically ideal focal lengths for certain genres. But there are some real annoyances that come with not having a macro lens, like doing true macro work, for sure. But some lenses, even though they do have really close focus at super telephoto lengths, they will get close to what a macro lens looks like perspectively, but not really. You will probably pay a lens weight tax, but there's actually an even bigger problem, and that's lighting. We are in deep doo-doo now. We need a few things to happen to make this shot work. The full subject needs to be in focus. We need it to be sharp to capture fine details, and we want a creamy background. So we have to stop down our aperture to get the full subject in focus. But now our background isn't creamy. We know that the closer we get to a subject, the creamier the background gets, because our depth of field gets much more narrow the closer we get. Now less of the subject is in focus. We have to stop down the aperture more. That decreams the background, so now we must get physically closer. The next thing you know, we are beyond f11, f16, and so on. A regular lens may not even be an option now, because we're maybe too physically far away and we can't do all the things we need to do to equal those things that we need. A more likely issue is the fact that artificial lighting is now going to be real inconvenient with a regular lens. But luckily, there are lots of lighting systems specifically for macro that attach directly to your lens, allowing you to easily introduce light and remain incredibly close to your subject without blocking said light. Another problem we see in other lenses is that they may just not be as sharp and colorful as a macro lens is. To me, really the biggest problem is actually not with lens qualities, it's with versatility being kind of rare in the market. By the way, link in the description if you're shopping for one. Macro-specific lenses solve lots of problems compared to other lenses. Clearly, if your interest is in small objects, there's no other choice. Get a macro lens and call it a day. But to achieve that look, you don't generally pay a weight tax these days. In modern times, they are becoming even more hand-holdable. They are pretty darn easy to carry around. I mentioned that other lenses might not be as sharp or colorful as a macro lens, and that's true. In macro work, those kinds of qualities are critical. It needs to be sharp to capture the fine details, and it needs to be colorful with lots of contrast because you want that great color that comes from these natural subjects like beautiful flowers or colorful bugs. There are lenses out there that are just optimized to be fast. They're performance focused. So you get speed and sharpness maybe, but the manufacturer may have sacrificed color rendition. There is no perfect lens, and there has to be give and take. In a macro lens, it's probably going to be slower than other lenses, but in exchange, you get optical qualities. Optics versus functional performance. So why does every photographer need a macro lens? Well, as I mentioned, versatility. There are lots of genres that don't need performance qualities and benefit from top image quality. Every macro lens I've ever used just so happens to be some of the most absolutely beautiful portrait lenses I've ever used. My favorites, the Nikon Z MC 105 f2.8 VRS and the Takina 100mm macro. Because it's a macro lens, you can get in real close on the eyes for some super unique shots. The skin tones and clothing are going to be benefiting from all of that amazing color inherent in macro lenses. They are sharp, so you can do some really cool jewelry shots right next to the portraits. It just works. It doesn't stop there either. What do you like? Street photography? Nothing cooler than going out for some street photography and seeing a cool flower popping out of the sidewalk, or nice baked goods at the coffee shop you stop at to take a break. Well, get close to that stuff and get a sweet shot of it. Then back to walking around and taking pictures of people and other street stuff. It's a little long for landscape, typically, but you gotta walk to the landscape location, don't you? Take a macro lens and your wide lens and carry the macro all the way out there and take pictures of stuff all the way, a large variety of stuff, right? 105 would be enough to get maybe some kind of critters in the distance, but maybe you see a pretty flower, or you see a grasshopper or whatever. You could do a lot of cool stuff on your way to the landscape location. It boils down to this. A macro lens is either necessary for what you're trying to do, or just really darn cool to have around for lots of things. If you're anything like me, an individual who enjoys a large variety of photography, you really just can't beat having a lens as versatile as a macro lens. They are so useful that I can honestly say if I had to give up everything in a crisis and I could only keep one camera and one lens, I would always choose a macro lens because I do so much, including macro with it. I can do more with a macro lens than I can do with any other lens by itself. Don't give me that craziness that an all-in-one will do the same thing as a macro. It will in a lot of cases, but I actually do enjoy macro work, so gotta have a macro. If you like versatility and exceptional image quality, get yourself a macro lens. Let us know in the comments if you agree. If you have a macro lens, which one do you have? What's the best one you've ever used? Do you use it for macro, or do you use it for something else? Or do you use it for everything, like me? I'm Z Wade, the Z Wade, and Z Wade Photo. Stay sharp, YouTube.